Hopefully you can hear me. Yes? All right. My name is Steve Guerra. Real fast, how many people here are board members? Board members. Good, because this is it says board members, right? So if you're not a board member, you're probably not going to find this too helpful. And then how many people who live in subdivisions as opposed to condos? Great, because this is mostly about condos. Everybody else is in a condo? Good, because this is mostly about condos. It'll help you out. I'm gonna go over some items that you can be proactive on, and looking at your community's documents as well as some other items to help, as it says, protect your assessment levels, your fair market values of your homes, and also yourselves as board members. All right. By the way, I think our firm represents a lot of the communities here, so I'm sure we've worked with you. I manage our firm, but we represent a lot of communities, so we're happy to be here, and I'm glad to be able to speak with all of you. So let's get into it. First of all, the disclaimer. I'm really not an attorney. We just act like attorneys. That's what it says. So really don't take. No, I'm just kidding. But this is not legal advice I'm giving. Okay? I am an attorney. I am an attorney. Okay, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about insurance. You're like, oh my God, we already talked about insurance. But we're going to talk a little bit more. I won't drag it out too much. We're going to talk about damages and costs. You know, people pay damages and costs all the time, and it eats away at your assessments. We're going to talk about leasing. I believe one of them, the guy before talked about a little bit how leasing can affect your insurance. So I wanted to talk about that. And then reducing your liability as a board member, how you can do that. Super important, because you don't get paid a lot, and it's like, why take a lot of risk when you're not getting paid a lot of money to be on a board or serve as an officer. So let's talk about insurance. The guy from Concraft read you some language, if you were in here, from bylaws that talked about what the association is responsible for insurance. So I don't need to get too much into insurance speak, but this costs associations a ton of money, how a lot of documents are written. What I wrote here is what a lot of documents say. If we haven't updated your documents, they probably say something like this, and we call it a single entity policy. And all that means is you have one entity, okay? Your association is the entity, and it insures things that both co-owners are responsible for day to day, as well as what the association is responsible for, one entity. And that means like common elements. So the association is typically responsible for a lot of the construction components, the common elements. But when it comes to insurance, a lot of documents also have the association insuring all fixtures, equipment, and trim within a unit that came with the unit. And again, Concraft, the guy from Concraft was saying that's what was going on in the community where that fire was. What does that cover when it says all fixtures, equipment, and trim? That covers kitchen cabinets, countertops, and of course your light fixtures, plumbing fixtures, and some baseboards, moldings, sometimes flooring, sometimes not. Just depends on the insurer. What's the problem with that? Okay, let's go. I think we talked about it. The problem is when a lot of these older, I don't know, does anybody have a community that's older than 15 years? I mean, how many older than 15 years? Okay, good. Because about 15 or more years ago, maybe 20 years ago, this was very common. And it was common to have this single entity insurance because you had like 30 insurers that gave good quotes for that type of insurance. Nowadays, you saw the one insurance agent here who was talking. They probably go out to only 3 or 4 insurers. There's probably only 3 or 4 insurers that give good quotes for association insurance. So smaller supply means higher premiums. Okay, so when you have less people bidding, it becomes expensive. What happens most on losses? 70% of losses are water losses. Okay, they're water losses. They're a hot water heater failing. They are a dishwasher overflowing. And when that happens, like your dishwasher overflowing or your dishwasher line breaking or your refrigerator line leaking or your toilet overflowing, it usually damages cabinetry. And that's usually the most expensive thing to fix. It could cost 20, 30 grand, let's say, to redo your kitchen cabinetry. So the problem is when you get 3 or 4 losses in a 3 or 5 year period, they'll kick you out of their insurance so fast. We represent a community in it's in Canton, and they had a huge water loss. I think it was about a $50,000, $60,000 claim. Their insurer essentially said, your rates are going up. Well, we're kicking you out. And we kicked them out in a pool, their rates are going up about 200%, I believe. And you know, I don't know what your premiums are, but you don't want to be in a situation where you get kicked out of your insurer. Because by the way, they don't have to renew you as an association. There's no obligation to renew your insurance as an association. It's a little different with co-owners. Co-owners, insurance companies can't just kick them out. They have to provide insurance. With associations, they can kick you out, and it's very painful and very expensive. You know, you have $20,000 premium, and all of a sudden it doubles or goes up 200,000 to 80 grand. That's going to hurt a lot of people. So what can you do to stop that from happening? We do this a lot. You should revise your insurance. And what you should do is have your co-owners insure the non-common element stuff. The fixtures, their own kitchen cabinets, their equipment, their furnace and hot water heaters, and their trim inside and their flooring. None of that is common element stuff. It's all personal property of the owner, but the association under most documents insures it. And it's super cheap for owners to get that insurance. In fact, you as owners should have your own, I know you're on the board, but you should have your own insurance right now. It's called the HO6 policy. More often than not, mortgage companies make you, if you have a mortgage, insure your fixtures, equipment, and trim. So most likely in a lot of communities with the documents that I showed you, you're most likely paying for the insurance through your assessment or your dues, and you're also paying for it directly through your HO6. So I can't stress enough, don't get in the situation that we see associations get in with your insurance company kicking you out and you doubling 200% up on your premiums, because you'll have to assess everybody. And it takes a good 3 years of being in a pool before you get back to normal rates. So that happens for years. So again, that's a simple amendment. It needs to be approved by 2/3. I can't stress enough. If I'm doing new documents, we represent developers. This is how we draft it, because this is what the insurance market is like. Okay, now how do we protect against damages to the association? Again, I gave that example of a dishwasher line breaking, okay? I don't know how many times a dishwasher line breaks, it damages all the kitchen cabinets, and the association says, Steve, we insure all this stuff. We got to make a claim because it costs 20 grand in damages. Again, a lot of these older documents say the association insures that cabinetry, the standard cabinetry. And they say, well, can we make the owner pay the deductible? It was their dishwasher line that broke. Can't we make them pay something? Why are all of us other owners paying this $5,000 or $10,000 deductible when this homeowner's dishwasher line broke, or this homeowner's hot water heater failed, or this owner's toilet overflowed? We see it all the time. The problem is most standard provisions and documents say that's on there. Co-owners are responsible for damages or costs if they're negligent, okay? What's the problem with that language? The problem is it is almost impossible to prove negligence in all of the scenarios I just gave you. Unless somebody knew their dishwasher line was about to break, they're probably not negligent. Unless somebody knew their hot water heater was going to fail, they're not negligent. The only time we can prove negligence is when somebody turns down their thermostat to like 40 degrees, or like I'm going down south, and they pipes freeze because they don't have enough heat. If that's negligent, we can prove it because we take a picture of the thermostat when we walk in, okay? But otherwise, all these other common problems, broken plugged refrigerator lines, AC condensation lines, toilets, washing machines, hot water heaters, we see that happen all the time. It's typically not negligent. And all the other homeowners who had, you know, a newer dishwasher, not a 30-year-old one, end up paying for that $5,000 or $10,000 deductible out of the assessment. How do you fix that? Again, be proactive. You amend the documents, just remove the language that says negligent. It will say instead, owner, you are responsible for damages to the association that the association incurs because of an item for which you're responsible. Something along those lines. But we don't have to prove negligence. It's difficult, if not impossible. I can't tell you how many times that I hear, Steve, what do you mean we can't do it? They caused it. You can do it if you remove the word negligence. Again, you just need to amend the bylaws. Most owners are fine with doing this type of amendment. Most owners don't want to pay their assessments for somebody else causing damage to the common areas. And the nice thing is, and I'm pointing out here, by the way, I should have said this at the beginning. You know, if you want to not have to memorize everything I'm talking about, I did put this up here and I tried to get like all super technical on here or using technology. There is this little design right here. If you put your camera on there, it's a QR code. Put your camera on there and it'll take you to a site, scroll down and you click it, it'll take you right to this presentation, okay? I meant to mention that. So grab that on the way out. This presentation will be on there, okay? But why is this not a problem for homeowners when we remove it? Because almost all HO6 policies come with what's called a loss assessment endorsement. This is super important. If you take anything out of this seminar right now, is the words loss or phrase loss assessment endorsement. Again, if you download that, the words right there. That comes with most HO6 policies. What does that cover? That covers if you cause damage and the association assesses the deductible to you. Your loss assessment endorsement, the homeowner would make a claim with their HO6 policy carrier, and the loss assessment endorsement covers that. However, most HO6 policies, the standard amount that comes on a loss assessment endorsement is around $1,500 only. So if you have a $5,000 deductible and you're assessing that or you're getting assessed that, and you only have $1,500 in coverage, you got to come out of pocket $3,500. So again, if you take anything out of this, call your insurance agents for your own individual insurance. Okay, as co-owners, I'm telling you, call your insurance agent. Say, how much do I have in a loss assessment endorsement coverage? Make sure you have at least as much as the association's deductible, because it could happen to you even if you're a board member. In fact, we worked with a manager, not here, who lived in a condo. Her hot water heater failed, caused damage, and had language that didn't require negligence. And it was about $5,000 for the deductible. She only got a $1,500 loss assessment endorsement. So make sure you get that. By the way, you can get like 50 grand. I do not sell insurance. Okay, I'm not trying to sell you insurance, to be clear. But you can get like 50 grand in coverage for like $5 annually. It's super cheap to protect yourself. What that also covers, by the way, in a loss assessment endorsement, is if somebody got hurt in your community, if you had a pool, somebody got hurt, they sue the association. Let's say they get like a $10 million judgment. Okay, let's say you only as an association have $5 million in liability coverage. That balance of the $5 million is going to get assessed to every owner. That's how it's going to get paid. Loss assessment endorsement covers that too. That's why I'm saying if you can get like 50 grand in coverage, it's so cheap. You protect yourselves. Educate your owners too. You're on the board. Educate your owners. The loss assessment endorsement is super important. But being proactive as a board member, amend the document, 2/3 approval, get rid of the word negligence. At the same time, explain to your owners to make sure that they have a loss assessment endorsement. Super inexpensive. Will totally protect them, and it will protect the association's assessment levels. Okay? Here's another one that can hurt an association's assessment levels, and it's in a lot of documents. It says this: the association shall be responsible for the reconstruction, repair, maintenance of common elements. Okay, this is in the bylaws and the reconstruction or repair provisions. And then some will say, in any incidental damage to a unit caused by the common elements. Okay, so let's say a pipe burst in the wall that the association is responsible for. And somebody just happens to, they got, I watched this show, I wish I could remember the name of it. It is called, oh my gosh, it's an antique show. It's not like Antique Roadshow or something like that, but The Strange Inheritance, that was the name. These people they inherited a picture that was on their parents' kitchen wall, okay? They got in a place, they found out it was a Rembrandt, okay? Their parents had a Rembrandt sitting in their kitchen. It was like $1 million painting. Kids had no idea. Okay, somebody in your community could very well have one of those on their wall. And if a water line burst, how are you supposed to know that? If you have this type of language in your document that says the association is responsible for incidental damage to a unit, you could end up paying for that out of the dues. You can be paying for their furniture, you can be paying for their carpet, you can be paying for their bases, their paintings, whatever. This is super broad and dangerous language. And there's no way for the association to protect itself, because you don't know what's in someone's home unless you're going in there and inspecting, and you're not doing that. So again, amend the documents. That is the best way to protect your association. You'll avoid paying for things you didn't know existed, and all you got to do, and by the way, I put on here some examples of, instead of the Rembrandt, Some other items that you typically see, drywall. Sometimes owners are responsible for the interior wall drywall. Most owners are responsible for painting the drywall. Often the association is not responsible for painting drywall, but if you have incidental damage language and there's damage to the drywall, association is going to end up painting it. So all you need to do is simply amend the document and get rid of that language. Just remove the language about incidental damage. When we do new documents for developers, we never put that in there. When we update people's documents, we always take it out. Not every document has that, but a lot do, and it hurts and it's painful, and people get mad when it happens. So, if you can be proactive for your community, get that out of your document. Rental restrictions. I believe, how many of you all have rental restrictions in your community right now? One? Okay. And, you know, the problem, and I believe, were you all here for the insurance gentleman who was speaking? Did he talk about rental and how it affects your premiums? Not only does it affect your premiums, but it also can affect financing. Okay, now this one, the other ones that I talked about, protect your assessment levels from damages or changing your insurance. Most homeowners are totally fine with those types of changes because, again, they don't want to be paying out of their assessments for other people's damage. Okay. This one's a little more difficult, particularly if you already have a lot of rentals. But if you don't, be proactive. I don't know how many times, particularly, and I've been doing this for a long time now, but I remember, you know, the Great Recession. People were buying up rental properties all the time. Then people would come to me and say, Steve, we have like 40% rentals and we can't get financing. Can we put a cap on there? And I'd say, yeah, we can try. But the problem is the 40% of the people who are renting already probably are not going to vote yes. It's very hard to get them to vote. So the best time to address rentals is when you don't have a lot of them. If you do have a lot of rentals right now, the best way to do it, let's say you did have 40% rentals, is put a cap on at say 35%, just slightly lower. If you try to shoot the moon and go down to like 10% and you're at 40%, people are going to view that as a ban. Okay, so depends on what type of rental situation you have. If you don't have a lot though, this is real important. It's real easy to pass because most homeowners are going to say, yeah, I want to make sure we have owner-occupied units. I want to know who my neighbors are, and it'll pass. If you got a lot of rentals already, it's going to be difficult. But what's the problem when you get too many financially? Conventional lenders like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA, they will not make a loan if you're over 50%, okay? If you have more than 50% rentals, they will not make a loan. They'll have some exceptions for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Now, somebody's making, by the way, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, if you don't know, like Bank of America makes a loan, they then sell it to Fannie and Freddie. Bank of America, though, or any other bank making that initial loan, sometimes their internal underwriting requirements, they will go over 30% rentals. So that 50% is out there, but a lot of times I see lenders stopping when they see the 30. So it affects financing. Here's the 50% Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And again, another requirement they have, and I run into this a lot, is you can't have more than one person own more than 10% of the units in your condo. If you do, or related entities. So if they get cute, you know, they set up an LLC that's like 123 Smith Street, and then they do 182 Smith Street, and name it differently, a different LLC. If they're related, that's treated as one. But if you have a 20-unit condo, I mean, I don't know how many units everybody has, but if you have a 20-unit condo and one person owns 3, you won't be able to get financing because they will not rent or they will not finance where one person owns more than 10%. It's not as big of a deal if you have 100, but you can get to 11 real quick. All right. So what do we do to address that? I don't know if it's under here. Oh, here's another financial problem, and it was discussed earlier. You get north of 40%, they'll start treating you like an apartment complex, and insurance premiums can double easily. So how can you resolve that? Again, you can cap the number of units. You can do an amendment that says no more than 20% of the units can be rented. Again, if you already have a lot of rentals, I try to just set that cap slightly below. And then when you get lower than that, then maybe try to do another amendment, bring it down. If you try to go too far down, people will view it as a ban, okay? And it's not good. We always or often include grandfather clauses that essentially say, if you're leasing right now, you can continue leasing even after this cap is put in place. That helps get the current landlords on board because they know that they can continue leasing. In fact, it almost gives them a monopoly because they know that not everybody else can lease. And if it's a beautiful community, they might even be able to get a higher price because of that, because the market is, there's not enough market for more rentals. Exceptions, again, hardship exceptions, we would also put in there. You must put in grandfathering language. We also put in hardship exceptions because owners might think, gosh, if I put a leasing cap in, and what if I have to go to a different job and I want to lease and I got to go away for a year, I got to go to short-term disability. We'll put hardship exceptions because we don't want owners who are living there to feel like it's hurting their ability if they have some sort of hardship down the road, upside down mortgage and the like. You can also limit the number of units that can be leased at any one time. So usually we'll do a cap, and then we'll also say no individual can lease more than one unit at a time. That avoids getting to that 10%. It doesn't say how many units you can own, but it says you can't lease more than one unit at any time. That will then stop somebody from buying a second or third one because they're not going to buy it just for it to sit empty if they can't lease it. So that helps protect you from the 10% requirement of you can't have more than 10% of the units owned by one person. So these also require 2/3 approval from co-owners and 2/3 also first mortgagees, by the way, to get this approved. First mortgagee vote's very easy. If they don't respond in 90 days, it's a yes vote. And like 99% of them will not respond. And so that passes. But that does require an amendment. And I got one more item to talk about, and then I was going to really leave it open because you're all kind to sit through this for just general questions if you've got them. Because maybe there's some other topics you want to hear me talk about or you got questions. If you don't, no big deal. But I did want to leave some open time for just general questions, kind of ask the attorney whatever you want. But reducing board member and officer liability, okay? The Condominium Act says this. Essentially, it says you have to have a clause, and all condominium bylaws have a clause that say that the association's board members and officers are going to be indemnified, okay, unless they were grossly negligent or they were there was willful misconduct, okay? The Nonprofit Corporation Act, though, was amended in 2015 to even broaden it even more. And you are essentially protected in the Nonprofit Corporation Act for doing almost anything except if you're doing something illegal, essentially, okay? So, and I've written here what the exceptions are, but it really broadened protections for volunteers. If you're volunteering your time, you should be protected unless, again, you're doing stuff that's illegal or that is, misconduct. But otherwise, you're going to be protected. But the only way you can get that protection is if it's in your articles of incorporation. It has to be in there, the language that's required. So another good way to be proactive, protect yourself and protect future volunteers is amend your articles of incorporation to include those provisions. By the way, most articles of incorporation only require a majority of owners voting at a meeting to amend them. So it's not the whole 2/3 of all owners, which can be a high hurdle. A lot of documents that are articles of incorporation are not part of your condominium documents. They're filed with the state. They're usually a lower approval requirement. And it's, again, a lot of times the majority of those owners voting at a meeting were quorums present. So it's not that difficult. It's an easy amendment. It's like takes us an hour to prepare or something like that. But if I were on the board, I'd want that protection. So think about it. If you haven't updated your documents since 2015, probably good that you look at that because that will add some protection. So I spoke fast. I wanted to make sure, because it was getting late, that I got the information to you. And then I wanted to open up and see if you have any questions for me in general about the law or any specific issue you're facing in your community. And it's for free. You're not going to get billed for this stuff. Yes.
Talk about pets.
Yes. My wife tells me if I tell people how I think about pets, they're not going to like me. No, I'm just kidding. Is that what you want to hear about? No, I know.
Legally, what kind of rules do we make about pets?
Sure. There are a lot of rules that you can't make. So let me start with those. You can't give a pet weight limitation, for instance. I see that in a lot of documents. You can't have more than a 35-pound dog, okay? It's like, and I'm always thinking like, what if they ate a steak last night? Who's weighing the dog next day? So that is that you can't do that. The Court of Appeals has held but that's arbitrary. I mean, you can have, I used to have a golden doodle. Does anybody know what a golden doodle is? Oh my gosh. So I have, quick story. So when we got the golden doodle, I never had a dog before this, and we got this golden doodle. I was dating not my now wife, and I was like all like trying to, you know, be smoozer. And I'm like, hey, let's get a dog. I was dating her not too much, so we got a dog. Never had a dog before. Anyways, that's a whole different. So we're sitting on my porch, and the dog's like 4 months old, and this guy comes walking up down the road. I lived in Royal Oak. He comes walking up, and he's got this huge like dog, not on a leash, and it starts walking. And I'm like, Mary, take the dog. And so she takes the dog, and she's standing in the street, and I'm sitting there. The dog runs up. I put my hand out. It's a nice dog, and I'm like, hey, what kind of dog is that? And the guy's like, oh, it's part Doberman, part wolf. And I was like, oh my gosh. And he's like, what kind of dog do you have? And she leans through and goes, the golden doodle. Sorry, she's not allowed to say golden doodle anymore. It's a golden retriever mix. But anyway, my point was, would you rather have a 90-pound golden doodle living next to you or a 30-pound pit bull, right? So the weight doesn't matter. So that is not enforceable. You can't differentiate between animals either. You can't say you can have one cat and 2 dogs, or one dog and 2 cats. Because the reality is some dogs can be trained, believe it or not, to like go and be trained in the house to go to the bathroom almost like a litter. So it's all behavior. In fact, that same dog, if I went, you guys watch Caesar, the guy, yeah. So I got the down with her. It worked real well. But she would, when we would go shh, like that going down the steps, because our kids when they were younger, they'd be sleeping and I didn't want to cry, she would tiptoe through the house. It's pretty fun. So my point is you can't differentiate between cats and dogs. There's a lot of mean cats out there. And there's a lot of nice stuff. So don't differentiate between pets, okay? What can you do? You can put a cap in, so you can say no more than 1 pet, no more than 2, and usually we'll say household pets. Watch out, I see a lot of times, I've seen you can have domesticated, you only can have domesticated animals. Well, you know what that includes? Chicken, okay, you can have a pig probably, okay, so watch out, don't say domesticated animals. Call them, if you're gonna update your documents, call them household pets. And then I typically will define it right there. I eat dogs and cats, okay, that's it. And then we'll typically say that birds or other small caged animals are not considered pets, and so they're not subject to a cap. So you can, if you amend your bylaws, 2/3 of those owners and tell them about, you can put a cap on the number. You can ban pets, okay? Now, if you don't have any kind of ban or cap in your documents, you cannot, I've seen people try to adopt rules that add how many pets you can have. You can't do that. Rules can't add restrictions, okay? They can just give specificity to restrictions. But so capping is really, or banning them is pretty much all you can do. Breeds also, you know, the hard part with breeds is, and I gotta say, my partner Mark, who trained me, we used to put in there, you can't have pit bulls or Rottweilers, okay? The problem is with that is, you've got a lot of municipalities that are trying to prohibit those types of bans, and I believe the state's trying to get something in that would prohibit it, but what if it's a mix, right? What if it's part pit bull and part something else, you know? So determining a breed is very difficult. How you test whether that's really the breed is invasive. How are you going to prove it? So we do always put language in there that says no vicious animals, but it's going to depend on the actual behavior of the pet. Really, it's the behavior of the owner, in my mind, right? It's usually the owner that's not controlling the pet or not treating the pet correctly, etc. But breeds, very difficult to enforce. Because you can't prove the breed without getting some sort of DNA test, maybe, or some sort of breed test. But again, the judge, a court is going to look to what was the behavior of that specific animal. So I'd always look to the behavior. I wouldn't try to ban breeds. I would keep language in there that says no vicious animals, because that'll bring in a lot. There's a lot of non-pit bulls that can be vicious. You see that, and again, it's usually because of how the owner raised the animal. It's typically my experience. So really, again, you can restrict it to the number. That's what I focus on. Focus on the behavior of that specific animal if you've got an issue with it.
Can you say, because we have now that the board has to eat pet before it's not in conflict?
I mean, you can say that. What do you do when you meet the pet?
Well, I mean, like, we had an animal, we approved it, but it was, the hardly hold on to this. So
Yeah.
it was after the board, okay? And, you know, my first thing was, I never approved the law, but we did approve it, and it turned out to be a big problem.
Yeah, and it's hard, you know, you might meet the animal and who knows, maybe they like gave it a pill right before, you know, you saw it and they're like all mellow. So I don't know if that's, you really should focus, I would focus on once they're in there. And the problem is too, is how do you differentiate what's worse from just meeting one time, right? Like, and then you gotta worry, are people gonna say, oh, you're treating me differently. You just said no to my dog because you don't like me. Okay, so you gotta watch out for that. I would always focus on what's the actual behavior, what harm is it causing? Barking a lot, make sure somebody's recording it or you got multiple people complaining. Certainly if they try to attack, we've had to unfortunately remove 2 dogs this year from condos because the dogs attacked either another dog or a person. Hopefully it doesn't get to that, but if you see your owners letting their dogs run off the leash, warn them, but if they don't do it, unfortunately, they might have to remove the animal. But I would interview them. I think there's a lot of ways to get around that. And maybe they're able to tame the animal then, but perhaps when they're not home and they have to sit in the house all day, that's when it's worse. So I don't know if it'll be a
We
really
have some
good.
rules that I know we have are wrong because it's by breed.
That's tough to
And
breed.
they have to meet, the board has to approve it, they have to, I know we got to change this, so and we already say you can't have any more.
Yeah, so on the 2 pets, you know, you look, we often in the rules say you gotta register the pet. You gotta make sure the pet's licensed. It's got its shots up to date. Okay, certainly you could say it's gotta be on a leash when it's on the common elements. So there's a lot of stuff you can do as it relates to what's required under the law, licensing, proper shots, leashes. I mean, those are all part of ordinances that are required anyway, so that's very easy to enforce. But those are the types of rules, picking up after your pet. That's a big one. We get picking up after your pet all the time. Like, and these people never. So by the way, a lot of documents, if you have that issue and you don't know, there are places, first of all, that do DNA tests of feces to figure out where it's coming from. I don't know how though they get the DNA from the actual dog. We've never done that. But what you can do is a lot of documents say, and a lot of people don't realize this, that you can charge a reasonable fee to anybody maintaining a pet. And so if you don't want to worry about whose dog just went to the bathroom, everybody who has a dog, maybe you do a $25 a month fee, a $10 a month fee, and you pay it to the person who picks up after a dog. They come in twice a week and pick up after. That solves so many headaches, and most documents allow you to do that, just so you know. It's typically in the pet provision. I don't see a lot of people doing it, but that's usually an easy way in my mind to solve that problem, if you have it. So.
I can tell you that in Mark City, the ordinance officer is very active. So once we took a complaint, we had a owner that owed us like $1,300 for not picking up the he actually took her to court, and she was just about to get 30 days. And he said, think about picking her up and walk back.
Wow.
But he himself would come out and check around their property.
Gosh, you know, there's some responsibility that's involved when you have a pet. Kind of like when you have children too. You got to take care of what they do.
But we didn't even think that he was helping us with something else. And I said to him, you know, dog, and he said,
You did. That's great. No, the order. You know, by the way, on the whole vicious dog thing too, if you call animal control, they'll come out. If there's a dog that's bitten another animal or a person, they will come out and they will determine whether they think that dog is vicious and needs to be taken. And you could be left out of it. So there are a lot of, you know, we see that too. Sometimes you see, we get questions a lot about, hey, there's some hoarding going on in the unit. We're concerned because we think it's damaging the walls and maybe they can't get access or to get to the unit, or maybe they've got material against heating elements like a furnace. You know, a lot of times you can call the fire department just so you know if you're facing that situation, and they will inspect to see if it is a hazard. So just a heads up too. Again, instead of having to reach out to us, you could always reach out. Municipalities help often. So it depends on where you live, but a lot of times they do a great job of helping out, saving a lot of money. So great questions. Any other questions? Yes.
have a unit where the lady, there's an elderly lady that lives on the first floor. Directly above her is a family with 3 children. They're very noisy and they're running all the time. And she brings to us on the board all the time about the noise and also the family that's damaged. It's like, I think they were going back to water overflow or something that's damaged.
Yeah, what can you do?
Yeah.
What's the name of your condo, if you don't mind me asking?
Parkway Meadows.
Okay, Parkway Meadows. I think we did your documents.
Yeah.
Yes. The, that's tough with the noise, okay? The problem with the noise is a lot of judges, unless it rises to the level of unreasonableness, which it might, I don't know. We had somebody file a lawsuit against an association that we represent where they actually had a sound specialist go in and like do a noise test to see if it rose above the level of what would be acceptable. Beyond that, a lot of judges will say, hey, look, you moved into a community where you have people living above you, you've got to expect that there's going to be some noise. So it's tough because without a sound test, it's really this person saying it's loud, but it's really this person saying it, this person saying no, I'm not. So without having a sound test, difficult to prove. But what they can do maybe, is submit a modification request. First of all, I'd send a letter to the upstairs owner and say, please, can you just try to be quiet? It's loud. Have the board send that. But beyond that, the lower owner potentially can modify her ceiling and add in insulation to dampen the sound transmission. Perhaps when you write that letter to the upstairs owner and you say, hey, can you please try to keep it down? It's loud downstairs when people are running around. I wouldn't say when your kids are running around, you got to watch out for kind of fair housing family violations. But when there are people running around, it's loud. Maybe you could put an extra throw rug down or some sort of sound dampening material on the floor. Those are very difficult to go to court with, though. Unless you got multiple people complaining about it from different areas, adjacent neighbors, or you got a sound test. That's very hard to enforce in court. But the lower owner could put in a request for a modification to the ceiling and maybe put some sound dampening material. It's not the best answer, but there's not much to do. That's just the nature of living below somebody. But unfortunately, kids run around, right? I mean, if it's late at night, that's different, but a judge would look at that and say, look, they're just living. That's what's going to happen. Now, there are some age-restricted communities, 55 and up communities, so there are ways to move into a place that maybe you live underneath somebody that aren't going to have any kids in there. That is the only time you can discriminate against families, is if you are in the 55 and up community. But in your community, it doesn't sound like that's the case. That would be a very hard thing to enforce. Regarding the stuff overflowing, the association probably should take some action and say, you need to fix this, you need to address these actions and step into that and do something to help her out and bring it to their attention. That's not an easy one either. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, if you're in yours, you guys are responsible for your drywall on the ceiling, the owners are? I don't recall. On the inside, the drywall on the ceiling? You'd be either making a claim with your insurance if you're responsible for the drywall, or you could go after them directly, but typically it's going to be you're making an insurance claim if you're responsible for your drywall. Even if it wasn't your fault, you're making a claim. And that's why you might want to ask the association to step in and say, hey, can you send a violation letter or send a reminder upstairs to make sure they're taking care of it? But yes, you will have to make a claim if you're responsible for that drywall on the top. Yes. Yeah. Good question. One there, and then back here. Okay. What about smoking marijuana in front of someone's door? That They're just standing there, they're not even offering. I'm just, okay. I mean, the smoking marijuana is a very difficult issue, and I say that because it's legal, and they analyze it like they analyze smoking cigarettes. Like if we were to go to court, this doesn't rise to the level of a nuisance. And again, just like the sound from children running around, we had a case that Ben Henry of our office handled in federal court, and the owner was smoking, it wasn't marijuana, it was cigarettes, but the owner had cancer, okay? Survived cancer. She filed a lawsuit against the association because one of the tenants in, down the hall smoked, okay? There, the association tried to amend the documents to ban smoking, didn't pass. But the court there essentially said, look, again, you moved into a community where it's not illegal. Your owners even tried to make it a prohibition, because you can amend your documents to prohibit smoking cigarettes or marijuana. 2/3 have to approve it. But that didn't pass them. And so the judge essentially said, look, it doesn't, most cases hold that, what is the level of smoking that rises to a nuisance? You have to have a bunch of people complaining. And in that situation, they didn't pass an amendment. So the judge viewed it as, well, the community's fine with it in general. And owner, again, you moved into an area where you have shared ventilation and shared walls. If you were concerned about that, you should have moved somewhere where that wasn't the setup. So it's very difficult on smoking. What we normally do is I have never seen a smoking case win in the US. I think one case I read about 10 years ago, but that rose to a level, they were smoking, let's say like 5 packs a day, something over the top. My point is most smoking cases, the person who's bringing the case doesn't win. What you can do is amend the documents 2/3 to ban smoking. That's going to be very hard to ban smoking marijuana. I can tell you that right now. Most people are not. You're not going to get 2/3 of people to. Most people don't like taking away rights, even if they don't do it right. They just view it as you're taking away a right. So that's hard. But what we would normally do is we'd send an owner who's smoking a letter. We'd say, hey, we got some complaints. We'd cite a provision that says, please don't, you can't create a nuisance or annoyance. We begin complaints. If you're going to smoke, please make sure you cover up any open sockets. Please make sure you're using an air purifier. And if you can, please smoke outside on your deck or something like that. But then the problem is, you go on the deck and then the person's got the window open. And like, oh. So it's not easy. Okay? It's not easy. Exactly. Any kind of smoke? Cigarettes as well? Marijuana, yeah, you're not supposed to smoke marijuana in public. I don't know if smoking on a limited common element deck is smoking in public or not, but it sounds like your ordinance addressed it. But the only way to really solve that problem is to ban it, but that's very difficult. Really educate your owners, tell them to be respectful, let them know they're living next to people, cover up the gaps, cover up, you put a towel on the bottom, put an air, try to keep it inside, or go sit on the deck or something, if that's allowed. But that's not easy. Come on, somebody give me an easy one. But that's not, it is, it's really because it rises to the level. Now, growing is different. If somebody's growing, typically they have to modify the common element water, maybe the electrical. That is easy. If they've modified it, that's a violation of the documents. They didn't get the board's approval. So growing is a different story. That is easy to say, no, you can't do that. It's legal to grow, but a lot of times, and maybe if they're growing a plant or two, you don't, but if they start growing larger, like their basement, let's say, a lot of times they have to get a different type of water system hooked up to make sure it's watered, and they're modifying compounds. That might be a little different. But generally speaking, if you really want to get rid of the documents, I have not seen any, but I've seen a couple of banned smoking marijuana, but not a lot.
We just tried and it lost by 4 votes.
Oh, close. Might be worthy of trying to get them.
Well, and the part was, I think everybody understands, they thought that if they voted prohibit that, it was on medical marijuana. It should have been written that, this is medical marijuana.
Yeah, there could have been an exception. Oh, by the way, there is an exception on the pet stuff. I'm glad you said that. If you have a pet ban or a 1 pet limit, watch out, emotional support animals.
Oh, yeah.
All day you have to accept that. But just because somebody says they got an emotional support animal and they give you something that just says, hey, this is an emotional support animal, that's not sufficient. You're allowed to ask some questions. I wouldn't ask them questions about running it by us or whoever you're working with, because there's specific questions you can ask, like, what is the disability if it's not evident? And how does this animal lessen the effects of the disability? And what major life functions does it affect? So there are specific things they need to answer by somebody who's a professional who can answer them. So I wouldn't just take it at face value, but just a heads up, you might have to make exceptions to your methods. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We make a big deal out of it, but the people, they'll get another dog that has.
Well, then,
Control it, and then it fits some person who we can.
yeah, you can evict. You know, I had somebody who had emotional support animal, a dog, okay, and then they wanted an emotional support dog for their emotional support dog. I'm just kidding. I'm waiting for that to happen, because that could happen. Like, oh, they need a friend. They're all but we did have one where a guy had two dogs. He was an apartment manager. He had two dogs. One was like a Doberman, one was something else. And the something else was they were allowed one pet. So what did he say? He said, "Oh, this is my pet. This is my emotional support pet." And he actually, when we even asked the questions that we're allowed to ask, he filed a civil rights complaint, and we ended up settling. But no money was paid. I mean, we just agreed. We just said, "Hey, you still need to answer the questions." He answered them, and then he got dismissed. But yeah, people know how to game the system. They do. It's unfortunate, but those emotional support pets still need to follow the other rules, like don't bite, don't be vicious, and clean up after your emotional support pet. So, all right. And yeah, we have a couple more. I'm going to do 3 more if that's fine. We have one, the person who had one left, and then you, sir. Okay, so go ahead. Okay. That's mortgage companies. So when you do the leasing amendments, yeah, it's not that easy with co-owners. Co-owners, you need 2/3 yes votes. They have to say yes. But some amendments, there's about 3 times amendments need mortgage approval. Okay, there's 7 times listed in the contract, but 3 times that really apply. Some when people are updated, you're changing insurance from association to co-owner. So the one I was talking about, where you make the co-owner either fixtures, put them, sure, those aren't common elements. That would require a mortgagee vote. Leasing amendments require a mortgagee vote. And if you're changing responsibility for items from association to co-owner, that requires a mortgage vote. And when the mortgagee vote happens, the mortgagee company doesn't respond, that's a yes vote. So just, but you gotta get the co-owners to say yes first. Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I'll question.
So, is there?
You're in a condo? I mean, any common element should. And most of the stuff, depending on if you're in an attached condo, okay, usually the drywall, ceiling drywall, the perimeter wall drywall is common. Okay? And the Condo Act says any changes to the common element require board approval. So if your documents are cited, require board approval. Certainly anything on the outside. If you're in an attached condo, almost all attached condos, all outside condos, some of them are drafted over here. But yeah, generally speaking, most modifications require approval. Even finishing your basement would require approval. Nobody ever asks to finish the basement. But you know that helps. I told you about that incidental damage language. That happens all the time. Basement, water comes in, sewer backs up. You get this incidental damage language in there. They're like, oh, I had the whole basement finished. Fix my carpet. Well, the association's not insuring that stuff because that's not standard item. Right? The association on those documents I showed you say you have to insure standard items. Well, basements typically don't come finished as a standard, so the association's not insuring it. But if you have incidental damage language, that overall basement say, oh, you have to cover incidental damage. Or we would typically come back and say, but you connected that 2x4 slab or the foundation. Did you get a modification to modify the common elements? No, okay, well then you violate the document. So there's some back and forth on that. We'll get rid of the incidental damage language so we don't have to go back and forth on that. And yes, most of those types of changes require approval. Okay. Sir? Are you on the board or? Oh, okay. Thanks. Good. I'm joking. You're all wrong.
So, master association. Master association. There's really nothing. Or do we have
Well, let's think of the association, if you don't mind me asking. That was yours. I was just curious to see if you worked with you or that association. But either way, don't stop paying assessments. I mean, a lot of times, like in a condo, a homeowner can't stop paying assessments. And the Condo Act essentially says, of course, of health, there are separate obligations. You have an obligation to pay assessments. That's an individual obligation. Everything else is a different obligation. You can never stop paying condo assessments. You can never withhold condo assessments. Even if you think condos doing a horrible job, or don't ever withhold your condo assessment because you will lose that fight, and all the attorney fees collecting it will be charged. So I get worried that the same type of thing would happen, even though the master association is not a condo association. Okay, it's not a condo, it's a master association. But that same argument might apply. And they have lien rights, and if you lose that argument, most of the time, the lien rights say all costs and attorney fees are going to be assessed to you for not paying. So even if it's not a separate obligation, but you're wrong about what they're doing, or the judge says, look, I don't care, that's not how you should have handled it, you should have done it this way, you should have paid your assessments. All those attorney fees, they will charge you for trying to collect it. So let's say, so I would not stop paying assessments. One. Exactly. How do you address exactly? Don't not pay assessments. Well, one, does you pay assessments directly, or does your association pay assessments? Well, I mean, they should get a letter of some sort saying, why aren't you doing this? You have an obligation to do this. This is a breach of contract. But it's a breach of contract. It might take a lawsuit, or it might take somebody else to get on the board. I don't know how the elections go there, who serves on the board. Sometimes master association, it's like presidents of the other associations are automatically on the board. Perhaps your owners vote for people, so get on the board. But two, that's a contractual obligation, so it's a breach of contract, not doing it. Okay? And that's what you bring the suit over. You might be able to bring a derivative action, which means you're bringing you are a member of a corporation, and you are bringing an action that says, Judge, I'm bringing this in the name of the master association because the board's not doing what they're required to do. You order the board to do it. And then if you're successful, the association has to pay your attorney fees back. It's really your benefit to the corporation because you're asking the judge to make the corporation do what's required to do this. But that's getting a little into the weeds on the type of action, but it boils down to a breach of contract. They have the obligation to do it, and you can enforce that in court, absolutely. Well, the specific performance is a concept of the law where it really only applies to selling property. Okay, that's the property says specific performance means like I'm going to sell you my house, and then you know I don't end up buying an agreement, and then I say like a month later, you know what, I don't want to sell you my house anymore because I found somebody else is going to buy it more. Most contracts will allow you to force me to sell it to you. That's specific performance in real estate because you can force me to sell that house to you. That's fine. Either way, I call it breach of contract. You can tell me to perform specifically how you want it to under the contract. Okay, but yes, you can enforce that. All right, good. I appreciate all you listening and asking your good questions. All right, and hope you have a good night. All right.